Hey, how's it going? My name is Ben Hanks,
My name's Kirsten.
and we were just looked at a little bit of research on project-based learning, PBL for short, and wanted to let you know a little bit more about it. So to get us started, kind of wanted to look at, can you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Kind of looked at to when to use project-based learning. So project-based learning is great for kind of changing up your structure and how you're implementing your curriculum. Of course, we've seen some students get pretty bored with constant lectures or constant just one-on-one work where they have to turn in something, it gets graded and evaluated and sent back to them. Project-based learning does a little bit of that, where it can gauge your students and kind of see where their ability is at and how well they've taken over your lectures and how they've taken your curriculum so far. So the other great reason why we like to use project-based learning is one, it enhances some student motivation by getting students out of their chairs and making them work into small groups, and actually creates a little bit more student involvement in that way by making sure students have to figure out the problems themselves, some solutions that can maybe figure out these problems, and then also analyzing the data that they have gotten from testing out so many solutions that they're trying to make work for whatever project you're going along with. So you know when the time to use it is kind of another way of making sure to engage your students and spice up a little bit more of your lectures, spice up the curriculum, and kind of seeing where they're actually gauging with those lectures and that curriculum. And if anyone's going forward, if people are staying the same, or if people are actually regressing. Next slide, please. So what basically is project learning? So really what it is student driven and teacher facilitated. So like I said, maybe after a couple of lectures or you've implemented a good part of the curriculum, the teacher can now give out some sort of group project. It can be based off of something that the teacher is going over at the time, and they want the students to dive a little bit more into the how or the why of whatever they are covering, right? So while they're in these groups, right, they're mainly focusing on one sort of solution or a reasoning behind they need to find out. In order to find this answer out, they'll have to collect and analyze some kind of data. So it's great for seeing how students can actually go out and make their own research and get inferences and more data off of the research that they have done up to that point, right? It's basically letting the teacher kind of sit back and see what their students are doing with the resources that they have provided so far.
All right. And then why use project-based learning? Project-based learning students have outscored traditional students on standardized tests. And there has been a lot of research done on this principle that when students are engaged in what they're learning and they have real world concepts that they're focusing on to tie their learning into, that they understand what they're supposed to be learning better than students who are just taking tests and learning material. Um, They are also able to solve applied and conceptual problems. I am an eighth grade math teacher, and this is a big one for my students with solving conceptual problems. We do a lot of project-based learning in my classroom just so they understand why they're doing it. And I think students learn better when they understand the motive behind what you're trying to teach them, especially in a mathematics classroom. Um, it also would help students solve real world problems. So this is also making those connections to how this will help you in the real world past your education just in primary school. It also allows students to make connections to cross-curricular concepts. So something that they could be learning in mathematics, they could also apply it to other science classes or history classes, and they make those connections based on project-based learning. They're able to see it a little bit more clearly versus just handing them a textbook and having them read a concept. And then the final thing is learning is more engaging for the students when they're using project-based learning. They're getting to be more hands-on, they're getting to be collaborative, they're focusing on more than one skill rather than just reading a textbook and answering a couple questions. Some examples of project-based learning. So these are some examples that I pulled from my classroom that my current students do. My current students just did a project. They created a 3D castle out of geometric nets to find the surface area and volume for each figure. So they were able to cut these shapes out. They had to measure them using a ruler. And then with that information, they were able to stack them on top of each other to create a castle looking figure. And they had to find the total surface area and volume. So this helps in a multitude of different ways. It helps them with architectural structures. It helps them understand how things are built while also using those standards for mathematics that I have to cover with them. Another example of project-based learning is developing a city map using different angle and line relationships. So this is a really big unit in 8th grade mathematics where they have to understand different angle and line relationships, and using a city map and having those students color their own city maps. They get to design whatever buildings are on the city maps, and they're able to tell me the relationships that those lines have with each other and make it into a mathematical concept while using real world examples. And then another thing that me and my students do is we measure different ingredients from a recipe to review fractions. We do this in the beginning of the year, and it's a really good example of a real world item that they run into all the time, and they can connect the math to, and then they understand what they're doing behind the mathematic concept. And then here are our reference pages. We use 2 outside references, and then we also used our textbook.